John, good to see you again. How's things going?
Very good, Dan. A lot's happened since we last saw each other, but most importantly, you've had a haircut. Is that a mullet? Have you now transferred your allegiance from Adelaide to Port Adelaide?
Oh, I could never do that. They call it I was told it's a modern fade. That's what it was marketed to me as. So,
yeah,
but I find it a bit rich, John, for you giving me hair advice, I've got to say. What do you...
No, my hair advice is just get a one all over once a fortnight.
All right. And what do they give you for the parts that don't really have a whole lot going on there?
Oh, that's a discount.
That's a discount. That's just good. Yeah.
So when you're Premier, are you going to be a member of both Adelaide Football Club and Port Adelaide Football Club?
Well, you can't. You can't. I wouldn't do that. But the thing that I have been passionate about as a South Australian is there's always the rivalry between South Australia and Victoria. And we always believe that we're getting done over by the East Coast elites in Victoria when it comes to the footy.
Because you are.
Because we are. And the footy, right? And so one of the main sources of contention is Port Adelaide, and their traditional footy Guernsey in the SANFL, the state footy league,
black and white,
the black and white, which looks like Collingwood's, so basically the same as Collingwood's. And so when Port came into the AFL, they had to have a different Guernsey made up, which is why they have the teal as well. Now,
the irony of Port Adelaide playing in teal, I find rich.
Yes,
but anyway,
they've never, the teals, it's like the furthest from the teals you could get. And they've never, I think maybe once they've been allowed to run out in it, but they're not allowed to use their traditional black and white because Eddie Maguire and the AFL, who's in the thrall of Eddie Maguire, won't let them do it. So one of my key election pledges as a Crow supporter will be that Port will run out round one in the black and white Guernsey, and Eddie can Eddie can go pound sand.
You are truly Broadchurch.
That is Broadchurch. That is bringing people together. So.
But you were just telling me you were in Adelaide last night.
Yeah.
Big event.
Yes, last night there was at short notice an event which was through the Liberal Party. Angus Taylor, Andrew Hastie, Phil Thompson, who were there in Adelaide for manufacturing, talking about manufacturing and defence. And there was an event last night at the great pub, the Arkabar, one of the great institutions of Adelaide.
And what was the feeling?
Very positive, actually. So I went to hear what they would say, and I was also curious as to what the mood would be like. And there was only about 24 hours notice given for the event, and I thought maybe about 100 people would come. There's probably about 250, 300 by eyeballing the room.
So the base is back?
The base is back for the Liberal Party. So when you see the polling, which has shown a little bit coming back, I think that's probably right. Now, yes, it's one event in one room, but if people aren't happy...
In Adelaide.
Yeah. But if people are not happy... They're not rocking up at all. So the way it's been described to me is the new leadership is on probation. That we'll give you a go.
I think that's what I said to you before the podcast.
I'm pretty sure you didn't, but if you want to take credit for
it, no. Look, I mean,
fine.
People are positive about the change if you're a centre-right supporter, but you want to see some evidence of change and you want to see more than rhetoric. But you said the rhetoric was actually quite good last night.
Well, I thought it was good. I mean, look, there was only the speeches didn't go for particularly long, but Angus certainly he made a joke about welcome to country.
Oh, what was
that if it was
you can repeat it given he said it to 250 people.
I think it's okay to repeat. There would have been people from the media there anyway, but basically, if this was a Labor event, then we'd still be doing the welcome to country.
Let's declare that as a win. So Susan Lee goes to the National Press Club. Her first major speech begins with a welcome to country.
Yep, and 3 flags everywhere.
And then Angus Taylor goes, one of his first major public speeches as leader of the opposition is in Adelaide, and makes a joke about welcome to country.
Yep.
Now the test will be, is he going to do a Dutton? Is he going to walk back from it? Is an activist going to say, Angus Taylor, you need to apologise? And not that I think he's got any, or he's redoing his office, so I'm not going to blame young woke advisors for telling him to back down or walk away from what he said. But that's going to be the test.
I don't get the sense he will, to be honest. Yeah, because there are other things in there about backing in the flag and our culture and identity. So. And I think he's been pretty clear from the start. It's about protecting the Australian way of life. So I don't get the sense that it's just off the cuff and not thought through. Not that necessarily Dutton didn't think it through, but I think this has been thought through a little bit.
So the next leader of the Liberal Party was also there. What did he say?
Andrew Hastie, he talks mostly about industry.
You didn't even hesitate when I said that. You didn't say. Oh,
Well,
you didn't say Tim Wilson was there too.
I know you like to wind me off on that, John, but I let a few go through to the keeper, I think. But I know
I didn't know you'd nominated for the South Australian state election as a Liberal candidate.
Oh,
I thought nominations had closed. I thought the elections
nominations
around the corner.
have. I don't think they've actually yet closed.
Oh, so
but I think
hope.
they're closing. Yeah, I think they're. I think.
What did Andrew Hastie say?
He just talked. He sort of reiterated his comments that were reported about the need for a manufacturing sector to have coal-fired power, gas, get rid of net zero, support Australian industry. So look, I think if it goes in that direction, I think it's going to be positive. It's a question of maintaining the argument to the public. But look, from my perspective, is it was a positive. If you just take that, what was said and how it was handled in that moment, it was good. Obviously, the question is always how far will it go? Will they keep up the momentum? As you say, will they back down? But taking it on face value, I think it's a positive start for the new leadership of the Liberal Party.
Did immigration come up last night?
Yeah, it came up. Yeah, it came up in the context of we've brought in a lot of the wrong people here. Angus just reiterated the points that he's made about, we need to close the door to people who don't share our values. So, again, it depends on what actually comes out of it in terms of policy and substance. But directionally, I think it's the right direction.
Significant.
You're sceptical.
Well,
I could tell you're a bit sceptical.
No. Look, I hope for the best. I think and we'll talk about what Labor Minister Julian Hill has
very significant
is about to say, or has said to the Labor-leaning McKell Institute.
Very left wing.
But what he said, what Angus Taylor's been saying, indicates, I think, the seismic impact of Pauline Hanson. I think if there wasn't an alternative to the positions that until very recently both the Labor and Liberal parties have taken, you wouldn't be starting to see these sorts of comments. I think it's significant that it's taken One Nation to get to 20% in the polling for a Liberal leader to talk about what 10 years ago would have been common from any leader, would have been expected from any centre-right leader, which is what a John Howard would talk about or what a Tony Abbott would talk about. So I think we're already starting to see a change in the politics. And again, it's significant. And actually, I asked you about this. I said before the podcast, what was the reaction? And you said, well, it's interesting. When they talked about economics, it was okay. When they talked about culture,
culture is what fires people
the group
up.
started clapping and cheering.
Yeah. Hi, thanks for watching. Did you know that 3/4 of you watching this podcast aren't currently subscribed to the IPA's YouTube channel? So do us a favour, hit subscribe and you won't miss any of the action. While you're at it, head to ipa.org.au, follow the prompts to subscribe to the IPA's website, so that way you will find all of our research and analysis. Now back to the chat. Yeah, culture is what fires people up, because this is the key thing. And look, the point is that we've sort of won this argument in the centre right now. I mean, you would have heard this time and time again about, stop talking about culture, it's the culture wars.
We've talked about how Labor keeps on saying, don't talk about the culture wars, which is why you should do the opposite.
Yeah, if your political enemy is telling you not to talk about something, maybe you should.
Yeah.
Because it unites us and divides them.
Yeah.
That's why they don't want us, our side of politics, talking about it. But I mean, I think that the debate about Australia Day is largely settled. I mean, you can't have a leader of the Liberal Party that won't back the flag and do it, enthusiastically. Now, yes, there's a debate to be had about capital gains tax and superannuation, retrospective and things like that, but it's not going to shift votes. It'll shift a few votes, but in terms of getting back the 20% that have gone to One Nation, well, it ain't about your superannuation balance. It's about our cultural balance of Australia. And that's where the action is.
And let's also talk about and come back to, I think, one of the most significant statistics in Australian politics from the last 10 years, which is IPA research has identified, and it's been confirmed by ANU research, 40% of Labor voters voted no.
To the voice.
So, again, well, I love talking about South Australia, but before we move off, your favourite state, you've got your election coming up. Your Premier talks a conservative game, but he backs a voice. He backs designated seats in Parliament based on your identity. He backs truth and reconciliation. How can, in your state, a Premier present himself on the national stage as a conservative and yet run an extreme left-wing agenda. And what is the centre-right in South Australia doing about this? Because the Malinowskis playbook is going to be played in other states as well. And we'll come, as I said, we'll come to Julian Hill. But Albanese, before long, is going to start talking about Australia Day, believe you me.
In a positive way.
In a positive way.
Yeah.
So what are they doing with Malinowskis?
Well, I call him Peter Wokenaskis because, look, I think he's probably not a bad premier for a Labor premier, all things considered.
And you're getting the motorbikes back.
You know, you're getting the motorbikes back, got the cars back, so it's not all bad. Chris Minns is similar. They're very similar, central casting, Labor right sort of thing. The thing is that what he has been able to achieve in terms of his mastery of the Labor Party machine is he keeps the left in check very well. So I would rather have a Labor right leader like him than Daniel Andrews or Jacinta Allen any day of the week. And I think he probably is personally fairly socially conservative.
But he backs the voice.
But
so you're saying he's keeping the left in check, but he backs the voice.
I know you love interrupting. If you let me get to it. I'm setting up. I know.
All right. You're just setting up what a good bloke he is.
You're going to do a Mike Huckabee on me. But he keeps the left in check by giving them what they want. And he does it in bits. So he doesn't do it as out and proud as what has happened in Victoria, because the left runs it. But they have the state voice to Parliament where 2/3 voted no. They have allocated money in the most recent vote. I think it's 3-point-something million for a treaty process. And I've got no doubt that they will probably look to do a treaty of some form in the next term of Parliament, because that allows his left flank to say, look, we've delivered for you. And it will be it won't be a Victorian style treaty. It'll be a treaty with not much bite, but he gets away with it because there's not a lot of focus on it. And people go, oh, well, you know, it's Malinowskis, he's okay. It's not going to go too bad. That's probably true. While he's there, it's probably not going to be terrible. But what happens when he goes? The architecture will be put in place to ride those functions a lot harder. So, yeah, that's where it sits at the moment. But you're right, it will be used as for sure, a template is successful.
That's worked. Well, we'll know when the
politically, yeah,
South Australian election happens.
Yeah. But you mentioned something very interesting about Albo is going to support Australia Day. Why would he?
Well, so
why would he do that?
Julian Hill, the Minister for Multicultural Affairs and Citizenship, an extreme left-winger, federal MP from here in Melbourne, and a speech to the McKell Institute is going to talk about, and it's released to the media and it's received a lot of attention. We'll talk about the fact that the Labor Party and the left has to start taking seriously the love of Australians for their country, that one nation supporters can't be patronised and ostracised. And he's talking about the need for the left to understand mainstream Australians. So this has been presented and portrayed exactly as Labor would like it to be portrayed, as a shift to mainstream Australian values from the Labor Party, or at least some sort of recognition. Nothing could be further from the truth. What he's doing is a couple of things. He's knocking off ISIS brides returning to Australia from the front pages. He is signalling that he's listened, or that Labor is pretending to listen to mainstream Australia when they're doing nothing of the sort. When Julian Hill says that the Prime Minister should only stand in front of one flag, then I will take him seriously. And unless the coalition is today and this week and next month and forever after until it changes, calling upon the Prime Minister to stand in front of only one flag, then the coalition will have missed an absolute key political opportunity. And then he completely mischaracterises the policy of multiculturalism that has been the prevailing political ideology of Australia for the last 50 years. So he says this, Dan, he says, the promise of Australian multiculturalism, simply understood, is the great Australian promise of a fair go, that everyone gets a fair crack at life, no matter their background, identity, or how long they have been here. That is absolute misinformation, disinformation at every level. It is a complete mischaracterisation of what multiculturalism is. Multiculturalism as a political ideology and a policy is the idea that there is no one central key culture to Australia, that you come to Australia, that you don't assimilate into the nation. And his claim that multiculturalism is a fair crack at life no matter your background, identity, or how long you have lived here is completely wrong, because the Voice was the antithesis of that. And this has to be called out. It's significant that Labor thinks they now have to say it. That's a win, a major win. But the idea that Labor believe anything that Julian Hill is talking about, I think, is an utter joke.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, how could you say you support fairness when you supported the Voice? I mean, this has absolutely no congruency whatsoever. And I bet you Julian Hill supports the treaty as well.
Yeah,
favouritism based on how long. It's the opposite.
Is he going to abolish DEI?
Yeah, he supports favouritism based on how long you've been here. It's the exact opposite of what he said. But the fact that like you say, the fact that he had to say it shows that we've won. The fact that you have someone from the far, far, far fringe left of the Labor Party who now at least has to pretend that he cares about Australia Day shows that the debate is over. That we've won the debate, at least for now. The debate is never
fully
won
or fully lost.
But we have for now secured Australia Day.
And again, isn't it interesting, after we've talked in previous podcasts about Paul Erickson, the Federal Labor Secretary, lauded for Anthony Albanese's election victory last year.
Yeah, because that was so hard to do, yeah. What a genius.
Pushing against an open door.
Oh, they're going to cut spending. Oh, you're a genius.
But when he said, don't talk about culture, so what is Julian Hill doing except talking about culture, talking about Australia Day, talking about he's sadly not yet talking about our freedoms, but talking about the need to understand what a good country Australia is. Very significantly and worryingly, he identified the growth in religious schools, the growth in homeschooling as a threat to be pushed back against. So again, even if we take at face value some of what Hill is saying in relation to patriotism, on the other hand, he's fulfilling Labor's agenda, which is to shut down parental choice, restrict freedom of religion, and this has to be called out as well. The Labor Party does not want parents educating their children. They don't want them to be exercising choice in preschool or childcare or schooling, full stop.
Yep. Well, I think the other point I was going to make here is he is the Minister for Citizenship, Customs and Multicultural Affairs. Why do we have a Minister for Multicultural Affairs? That in itself is divisive. We should have a Minister for Australian Affairs because we're all Australians. So I think the Liberals should just get rid of that portfolio, multicultural affairs, and change it to something about Australian values.
Well, it should be the Minister for Integration and Assimilation.
Yeah, that'd be a good start. But I do think if you look at now where we are, where is the Liberal Party? And you've made a very good observation about One Nation has sort of dragged it through the most brutal way, which is taking votes. And if you take votes, then they're going to listen. I think we're now sort of starting. This is not just about the leadership, but look at the last few years. We're seeing the rebirth of a Liberal Party that is realigning with mainstream Australians. So cutting immigration, we're seeing the start of that. They've dumped net zero from their platform. We're seeing more unambiguous support for national symbols, our flag, anthem, and so forth. And we're also seeing haphazardly, but some support for freedom of speech.
And we'll come to that, which is very exciting.
Which traditionally the Liberal Party has not been particularly solid on.
No, I'm not going to say not particularly solid on. I will say absolutely hopeless sellouts.
Oh, where's your pre-selection?
Nowhere.
You can, but
my words, not your words. No one can hold that against
your words.
Your next pre-selection.
But I think it's significant that we're sort of now seeing it in somewhat of a haphazard manner that they're rebirthing to more of a mainstream view on this. But I think your assessment's right, that a lot of this has been from just the brutal political reality that you're on an 18% primary vote. See, you got to try something different.
So why do you think then in a broader sense, the coalition is sitting on such a low primary vote when traditionally this has been some of its strength? Patriotism, the nation.
Because they stopped talking about it.
Because they followed the Labor path of don't talk about culture.
Don't talk about culture. One Nation ate their lunch in a very big way. I think that what will be...
So do you think because One Nation's talked about it, they didn't talk about it?
Possibly. I don't think that's the major part. Yeah. I do think a part of it is that they didn't have the language to use, because we haven't had to talk about it for like how long? 30 years, 40 years? Because it was settled, right? It was all settled. The beauty of... I don't know, people say, why do you guys keep banging on about the voice to Parliament? Because it was a watershed moment, because the centre-right had to learn how to talk about culture again. And it wasn't just, these weirdos from the IPA are banging on. It's a big national debate. Labor, by and large, doesn't like modern Australia. They want to change it, and they want to change it in their image, whether it's to have a voice, go to some kind of a republic model, which is not going to be a people's republic, but a politician's republic. All of these things are about Labor's attack on our way of life. So flags and everything. It's just a piece of fabric. No, a flag is a statement about sovereignty and identity that captures our values and what we share together. And that's why it took the Liberal Party 9 months to get to a no position on the voice. It should have been immediate. We don't believe in racial separatism or division. But it took them 9 months because they don't know how to talk about it. But what it did do is it forced them to have to deal with the issue, to have the debate. And then they saw, well, if you have Jacinta Price or Warren Mundine and people that are out there, not only is it okay, but they actually stratospherically increase in terms of their popularity. Australians get behind you. So they had to deal with it. Now they have the language and the confidence to say, we can talk about this stuff, it's okay. And actually it's popular. And actually people will vote for us if we do this. So that's my assessment.
And all the talk, I would agree, and all the talk of, and now amongst some Liberals, well, we have to reach out to multicultural communities and diverse communities as they're called in code. Well, those multicultural and diverse communities voted no in greater numbers than Australian-born.
To the voice.
To the voice.
Yeah.
And people are understanding that millions of Australians have come to Australia because they like Australia as it is. And as Tony Abbott says, it's not for Australia to change, it's for them to fit in.
Yes.
Very deliberately. And when Tony uses such language, it's very powerful, which is why your podcast with Tony is so successful, Dan.
I think that's probably a major part of it. Yeah, I can't take all the credit. But the free speech thing. So Sarah Henderson, who's one of the shadow ministers, made some important comments recently about the e-safety commissioner, Julie Inman-Grant, and the gigantic overreach that she has had.
So Sarah Henderson was a Victorian senator, very effective shadow minister for education, developed a strong education policy before the last federal election, which never saw the light of day, or if it did, it was maybe 12 hours before polling day. Polls opened. She was subsequently dumped from the ministry by Susan Lee when Susan Lee became leader. Sarah Henderson has now been reinstated into shadow cabinet by Angus Taylor. She's the shadow minister for communications. And Sarah Henderson, I think, has made in the last few days one of the most unambiguous commitments to freedom of speech and accountability of our censoring bureaucrats that I can recall the Liberals have made in years. I think it's overdue. It's welcome. And the context of it is that the e-safety commissioner, Julie Inman-Grant, who again we've spoken about, a position established by the coalition government, had been using her powers under, well, actually, I was going to say using her powers. The point is she didn't have legislative power to censor particular tweets. So if a tweet is clearly a breach of the law, she has the power to order a takedown from a social media company.
You mean like if it's inciting violence?
If it incites violence. Yeah. She also has given to herself what she calls informal powers, which she has no legislative authority to do, but we've discovered that as the e-safety commissioner, she and her office have been sending hundreds of what she calls informal notices to media companies to take down posts and take down statements that are not against the law, but which she doesn't like. And this is a huge breach of her powers and authority. And the latest instance was a tweet on X from Miss Baumgarten from Gays Against Groomers. And this Miss Baumgarten tweeted a story about a primary school that was teaching 8 to 12-year-olds about radical gender ideology. And the tweet was, this is from Miss Baumgarten, "Children should not be learning about sexualities at such a young, impressionable age. This is foul. Leave the kids alone." And that would be expected to be a statement of opinion. It's part of the free discourse of a free society. The Office of the E-Safety Commissioner sent an informal notice to X or to Twitter to take it down. Ms Baumgartner then challenged the decision in the Administrative Review Tribunal, and the E-Safety Commissioner was found to be acting unlawfully. The E-Safety Commissioner then appealed the ART decision to the full federal court, and a few days ago the full federal court found against the E-Safety Commissioner and said this is significant, and you don't have to have a legal background to understand the significance of this sentence summary. "The judges found that a government official cannot purport to exercise a power to achieve a coercive result and then claim immunity from review because they acted outside their power."
That's quite good.
Very
Normally
good.
these tribunals are terrible.
That's right. Yeah. This is hugely significant. The IPA, our friends at the Free Speech Union, and other organisations have been for years talking about the powers of Julie Inman Grant, which are too great, which censor debate. She famously censored in June 2024 the video of the stabbing of Bishop Mama Marie Emmanuel, and Elon Musk pushed back against that. And many, including the IPA, pointed out that while she was happy to have that video censored, she did nothing about the censoring of the George Floyd video. So if she doesn't like violence, then she presumably mustn't like all violence. But hugely significant. And Sarah Henderson, the Shadow Minister for Communications, has called for a full review of all of the powers of Julie Inman Grant. Hugely positive.
That's good.
Step. And coming to your first point, it indicates that the coalition might be starting to take some of these things seriously and take free speech seriously. Now we just need the coalition to commit to repealing Section 18C, to repealing the hate group legislation, and abolishing the E-Safety Commissioner position. But we've made a very good start.
Yeah, and also in the last term they opposed the misinformation laws, which they had originally, at least partly, thought of themselves when Neil Fletcher was the Paul Fletcher was the communications minister. So it's a bit haphazard, but I think this is actually quite significant because it was the coalition who came up with originally it was the Children's E-Safety Commissioner, and then they dropped the children's name because it's always mission creep.
Yeah, because no public servant ever finishes the job they began doing.
And Peter Dutton, when he was leader, vigorously defended Julie Inman Grant herself.
Yes, he did.
Which was a major, major mistake to do that. So like the point I've made is, like, a lot of the time, because the coalition was in power for over a decade, they feel that they're beholden to the decisions they took when they were in government, which I can understand. But I mean, come on, now's the time that you're going to have to actually, either admit that you got some things wrong or just move on. As Sarah
should Angus Taylor make a speech and do a Kimmy Badenoch and say we got all these things wrong?
Well, it hasn't worked out for Kimmy, has it? So I don't know. I don't know whether that actually works. People want to know, what are you going to do now? And so this is the interesting thing, which is that the thing I'm going to be looking at over the next 6 months is how much of the One Nation vote comes back. Because just because you have great policies, say they have the best policies and they have the best shadow cabinet, but what the Tories have learnt in the UK is once you get beyond a threshold, people lose trust and they stop listening. So Kimmy Badenoch, I think, is actually a pretty good leader. And I think she has some pretty good policies, and I think she'd be a pretty good Prime Minister. But a lot of people don't listen when Tories speak anymore because they say, well, you said you're going to dump net zero, but you guys did it. You're going to cut immigration, but you guys did it.
You said you're going to restore freedom of speech, but you guys...
You did lockdowns.
Did lockdowns.
And what was worse, the only reason why it might not be as bad for the Liberals now is they got a big mandate, right, when the Tories got in. This is a very important point to remember because it was all about Boris Johnson and Brexit. It was all tied together. And I remember I have family because my parents are from the north of England, Manchester and Birmingham, and all their families up there. And I remember my dad telling me in the lead up to Brexit, he said, yeah, all of our families voting Brexit. And I was surprised because they're all Labor working class voters. And that's when I started to get this, we would talk about the realignment. I started to think, well, that's actually quite significant. I wouldn't have thought that. And then they all voted for Boris. They didn't vote Tory. They voted for Boris. Right? They voted for Boris because they thought Boris isn't really a Tory. So they hate Tories. They're not just Labor, they hate Tories. And they blame Thatcher for deindustrialisation, which is not entirely untrue. So they have a very negative perception of Tories. So they voted for Boris, who basically presented himself as kind of a Tory but a bit different, right? And
a man of the people.
Yes. And he betrayed them. They completely stuffed it. So they put all of their trust in Boris. They voted for Tories in record numbers. They had this massive landslide victory on the back of getting Brexit done. Now, Boris did get Brexit done. Good on him. But everything else was a disaster. And the Tories made things worse for the people that voted for them. So I just think that betrayal of trust is maybe insurmountable now for the Tories. We haven't had a moment like that here in Australia as yet, right? We haven't had this sort of movement of Labor voters to...
The Liberal Party hasn't completely betrayed Australian people just yet, so there's hope.
There might be one last
chance.
Yeah,
no, I love the argument.
So this I think is this is why I think it's the last chance. Right, with the current leadership in this term of Parliament, I think if they get it wrong, that's probably going to be it for people trusting the Tories. The only other difference, obviously, you've got reform.
Do you mean the Tories or Liberal Party?
Liberal Party, sorry.
Oh, yeah.
Liberal Party. This term in Australia is the last chance of the Liberal Party to rebuild trust with mainstream Australians.
Especially when you have a federal government that is so bad.
Yeah.
This is not a Hawke Keating government.
No.
This is a Anthony Albanese, Julian Hill government.
Yes. Yeah. Well, at least we'll keep Australia Day. So
yeah.
But the only other key difference to remember, and this is something that comes up so much in conversation, is about, the parallels between Reform and One Nation. I think it's very different. Nigel Farage, yes, Pauline Hanson's been there for a long time, but I think that the Brexit thing was done by Farage. Farage was a member of the European Parliament. He has set up a much more expansive nationwide operation, including at the council level, which One Nation has not yet done. Now, they may do it, and I know they're trying to do it. I think that Reform is probably 5 or 10 years advanced in that. So you can actually go, I reckon Farage could be PM. I reckon Reform could get the numbers. Like, you can sort of see that happening. You can't see that happening here yet. One Nation, you say they could pick up 4 or 5 senators. Yep.
Maybe the balance of power in the Senate.
Yep, I can see that.
Yeah.
I can see 3 or 4 lower house seats. Yep, I can see that. But I can't see 40 seats in the lower house happening in this term. Maybe next term it could happen, but it's not going to happen this term. So the Liberal Party has a unique opportunity, if they understand it right now, to rebuild. I'm not saying they should rebuild for the sake of it. I'm just saying that this is the opportunity they have.
But you make an important point about the Liberal Party apologising. It's about people looking to the future. And what are you going to do for me? And this is one of the frustrations I have with some of the rhetoric of the Liberal leadership right at the moment, which is harking back to the era of Howard and Costello. I don't think speaks to people in 2026. 1996 was 30 years ago. There's many people voting for whom Howard and Costello are only a memory. There's many people voting who weren't in Australia at the time. And as important and as good as the Howard Costello years were, they are not now. Imagine...
It's a very different country.
It's a very different country. And imagine, Robert Menzies wins the Liberals' first federal election in 1949. And I was thinking about this. Imagine if he goes to the 1949 election talking about what happened in 1919 and what his policies might have been. In 1919, you were recovering from the Great War, you had the Great Depression after that, and you had the Second World War. 30 years is a generation. And when Liberals talk about what happened 30 years ago or even 20 years ago, it's harking back to the future. And I'm happy to be nostalgic. I wish it was 1996, but it's not. The challenges are different. The challenges to our culture are greater. Our economic condition has worsened. Our geopolitical strategic situation has worsened. The Liberals have to talk about tomorrow, not yesterday.
Yeah. Shall we talk about your short little...
Oh, well, I'm excited.
book
Well, look, we're
you've got
talking
there?
about signs of hope for the future, and I think there are some, and I want to talk about The Golden Thread, A History of the Western Tradition, that has just come out by Alan Guelzo and James Hankins, both Ivy League professors.
Have you read all of that, have you? Almost?
Oh, I'm 100 pages in, Dan. Not every book that I talk about I've read completely by the time I talk about it, but I can't wait for this. And I want to start our conversation about this by quoting from a wonderful review from the Wall Street Journal. And it goes like this. Bear with me.
Yep.
Question: when is a book not only a book? Answer: when it is also a kind of museum so large, so stuffed with treasures and so full of intriguing corridors that you're at once exhilarated and made faintly desperate because you want to run everywhere and see everything. You would have experienced that at the Prado or the Louvre, Dan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, not so much at the V8s, but
Yeah.
certainly.
And you know that unless you extend your vacation, you may not have enough time. So this is a book that's just come out, and it's nothing less than a discussion about why the Western tradition is so important, why we need to treasure the history of Greece, the history of Rome, the history of Christendom, the history of our Jewish tradition. And the book is worth buying. It's about $130 Australian, not least for a wonderful introduction which explains why we believe the things that we do. And the authors point out the dangers presented by the neglect of Western history are not trivial. When citizens of Western countries are utterly ignorant of history, as most now are, they are left unarmed against the general hostility to their own tradition that has become so destructive a force in contemporary culture. And then they talk about the impact of young people who don't have a sense of history, and they say we lose all sense of proportion about events and lack the mental resources to resist black and white thinking, confirmation bias, and catastrophism. The latter habits of thought lead to fanaticism and have left whole generations unable to participate fruitfully in civil society. So I'm only about 100 pages in so far, but it's interesting because it's very much a focus on the decisions of leaders. It's most histories of Western civilization these days regard the rise of the tradition as ultimately the triumph of secularism. The authors identify the important role of religion and belief in Western civilization. The first author, Alan Guelzo, is a famous Lincoln scholar, and as we do, we read all the comments on our YouTube posts, and I very much appreciated all the feedback I've got about my discussion on Lincoln and slavery from a few weeks ago.
That excited people.
Yeah, it did. I think
controversial.
Alan would agree with me on his interpretation of Lincoln and slavery. But it's a wonderful book if you're going to do something for yourself or your children or your grandchildren. Look out for The Golden Thread, History of the Western Tradition. This is only, of course, the first volume, 1,300 pages going up to about 1,450. I can't wait for the second volume.
So it's going to be two
It's going to be quite big.
volumes.
Yeah, it's going to summarise.
Well, you had a good
It's going to
stat.
summarise all of Western Civ.
Well, you told me about something before about Alexander the Great and 16-foot.
Yeah. So Alexander the Great's spheres that allowed him to conquer most of the known world back in the day were some 16 feet long.
There you go. So you not only learn about Western values, but you learn about some.
Well, and
tidbits.
you also learn that our values sometimes have to be fought for in the sphere of public debate, and sometimes they have to be defended in a military sense. And the authors point out that if we don't understand how our freedoms were fought for, how they were gained, we're not going to be defending them. And they make the point, and this is significant because it's written by two practicing academics who have spent years teaching. They explain that some of the cynicism from young people towards Western civilization and towards their history is because those young people don't feel they've got a fair deal.
Or a stake in its future.
Or a stake in
Why
its
would you
future.
defend it if you can't even
Why
buy a house?
would you defend it if you can't buy a house, if you can't get a job, or if you are a white male, you are increasingly excluded from participation in the public sphere.
Yeah.
And that the tradition of Western Civ has given us many principles, but one of which is the idea that we're all individuals and we should be judged, as Martin Luther King Jr. said, by our character. That's why we read these books, not just to find out how long Alexander the Great's spheres were.
I sort of get the sense though that I'm feeling increasingly sort of optimistic about where our societies are going in certain ways. Like I do think in the same way that the Voice to Parliament debate was an excellent thing because it forced us to think about what does it mean to be Australian? What are we actually fighting for? Why don't we like the Voice to Parliament?
Why does equality matter?
Yeah, we haven't had to face that.
Yeah.
The broader challenges that are taking place in Western countries, whether it's to do with the failure of academic institutions, whether it's the stresses and strains of mass migration, whether it's the internationalisation of institutions and the effect they have on our sovereignty, and with obviously the proliferation of the online world where people are able to inform themselves without the need for gatekeepers, I do think there's been a pretty good rediscovery of Western values and what it means, particularly among younger generation. I'm not saying that we've overcome the problems, but I sort of get the sense that these challenges that we're having are forcing people to reconsider and ask questions. And most of the time it's like, well, actually what we have is pretty good.
Adversity is preparation for greatness.
I reckon that's I don't think I can beat that. Why don't we end on that one, John?
Thanks, Dan.
All right, we'll chat in a couple of weeks.